There we go. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Habakkuk session 2. So we've looked at Habakkuk's first complaint and God's answer. And so today we're going to pick up on Habakkuk's second complaint, as it says in the ESV. So we're going to do from verse 12 of chapter 1 to the end of verse 1 of chapter 2. So I don't know when we put in verses and numbers and things like this to help us find verses in the Bible, it was done in a way that separated this, whereas you think its natural break would be a verse later, but that's where that is. So I don't know if someone would like to read, someone would like to pray. I'm happy to do either. Shall I read this morning? Anyone like to pray?
We note takers.
Oh, well. Is that you, Steve?
Yes.
Yep.
I thought I heard somebody. Was that Jenny laughing?
I heard Jenny laugh, but it's probably because you've got a mouthful of cereal, maybe.
Right.
Would you like to pray, Jenny?
Yeah.
I didn't catch that. What did Jenny say?
In a minute. She's just.
Oh, in a minute. Yeah, it's fine. Okay, let's pray then.
Okay, go for it, Steve.
Okay. Yeah, Heavenly Father, thank you for today, and thank you for a new adventure, and we look forward to this adventure, and we look forward to what we're going to see and what we're going to hear on this trip, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Steve. Thanks, Jenny. It's good to have honesty on this program, you know, and recognize where we're at as well. It's good. Right. Now there we go.
Do you mean that we can have public complaints?
No. We can have breakfast and be straight up about it. Right, there we go. Habakkuk 1, verse 12. So this follows the answer that God's given, that judgment is coming. And this is Habakkuk's second complaint. Are you not from everlasting, O God, Lord my God, my Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, you have ordained them as judgment, and you, O rock, have established them for reproof. You who are of purer eyes than to see evil, and cannot look at wrong, why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallow up the man more righteous than he? You made mankind like the fish of the sea, like crawling things that have no ruler. He brings them all up with a hook. He drags them out with his net. He gathers them in his dragnet. So he rejoices and is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his net and makes offerings to his dragnet, for by them he lives in luxury, and his food is rich. Is he then to keep on emptying his net and mercilessly killing nations forever? I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me. And what will I answer concerning my complaint? And so Habakkuk has a statement. So let's just bring a bit of background. Some of us may not remember from yesterday, or may not have been here yesterday. So what happens here is he's saying, the first complaint was, Lord, your law doesn't seem to apply. There's a whole lot of wickedness and violence and things like that happening. And then the Lord replies and says, judgment is coming. The Chaldeans, Babylonians who are being raised up are a fierce mighty army, and they are going to come and punish this. and they are people whose strength is their own God. And he describes some other things about these people. They are coming in judgment. And here we have Habakkuk kind of saying back to God, wait a minute, that's going to be a little bit indiscriminate, isn't it? How can someone who is more evil and our nation is more righteous, how can those more evil people judge us? And so he's got to, and that's just a couple to crack it open. But in this, it's loaded with questions. Questioning God's strategy, questioning what he's saying, questioning how does this balance out? How are you fair, God? And as we said yesterday, Habakkuk is an unusual prophecy. It is written in the form of a lament, like the Psalms. It's written in the form of a kind of complaint to God. And God is big enough to take our complaints and our questions and the things we have, and this is part of that. It's I think Steve yesterday hinted it's a little bit like Job, but not as long. Whereas in Job you've got this kind of lamenting back and forth and this arguing about what is God doing and all of those things. Here in Habakkuk you've got a similar thing concerning the wicked and why they seem to do so well and what's really going on. And at the same time, there's the heartbeat for his nation tied in with this. And towards the end of this, he sets himself up as a watchman. I'm a watchman on the tower watching this, an alarm bell, if you like. So there's a number of things going on here. I don't want to go too much or I'll end up preaching on this. So I'll just open it up to you guys and see what stands out, see what you've, but just bear in mind we're part of a process here and we're not rushing ahead on the process. We're walking through it step by step, understanding the process we're walking through and seeing what God's got to say to us today for society around us when, in some ways, we live with this and wrestle with the same issues. Why does evil seem to do well? Why do things that are worse than something else seem to judge it and devastate it? And how does indiscriminate stuff and indiscriminate judgment, what's fair in that? How it's like just dropping a net in the sea and catching anything. It's a catch-all, if you want to use another phrase. So I'll throw it open and see what you guys have to say. I see Steve's got his hand waving there, up in the air already. Go for it, Steve.
You're muted.
Thanks very much, Jenny. I don't mean to take very long at all. I'm wondering whether that's a good summation of the Lord's answer from 5 to 11. Now, I understand that the Lord is saying, for I am doing work in your days that you would not believe if I told. For behold, I'm raising up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation. Okay, and then the thing that I thought, well, is this the Lord's judgment? I see that the Lord's doing something, but actually I read it maybe different because now where is it now? Basically, the Chaldeans come forward. I forget where it is in their judgment. It doesn't say, the text doesn't say they're coming forward with my judgment. And you can read that in. That may be true, but I'm not sure that that's not the judgment that I think of the Lord, bringing more violence and more wicked people. I mean, there was. I'll just bring this up. Bless them beyond belief. That was the phrase from yesterday, and I thought, yes, I understand where that phrase comes from. Is that not a curse? When people are blessed beyond their belief, because this looks like another curse for the Chaldeans. Or it could be the Lord's judgment. I don't know. I'm sitting. I'll sit on the fence anyway. I was just going to say that you were summed up and said this is the Lord's judgment. Well, I don't know. I think of Judgment Day as His ultimate judgment, which is just and true. It's not saying sure to the righteous people will give more unrighteousness.
Okay.
So yeah. Excuse me for
It's very. I mean, you of course we'll look at things in different ways, and that's part of what brings the richness. But I think the setting for Habakkuk is before the destruction of Israel, and so the destruction by the Babylonians of the 10 tribes of Israel, as opposed to the 2 tribes of Judah, is coming, and this prophecy is written in advance of this coming. And so, yes, I agree, God's ultimate judgment is Judgment Day, and that we discussed part of that yesterday. But actually in this, I'm just wondering, in its historical setting, this is just before the judgment comes from the Babylonians, well before I think there's any inkling of it. God's showing Habakkuk what he's about to do, and through the Babylonians. And that comes after a long history of being incredibly gracious towards a nation which has turned against him. And so actually in all of this, there is a judgment, but it seems, I think, to Habakkuk, he's questioning that judgment, and that's what I read in this. I don't know if anyone sees, but I think there's looking at this. The danger is we take this out of context. So, for example, the amount of times I've heard, you'll not believe what I'm about to do in your day, quoted in links to revival, links to all these wonderful things, totally out of context of the passage it's in, which is about the judgment of the Babylonians coming. And this is what you find is, I love that verse, I love the way it's worded, but there's no connection with the rest of the passage. And in this, the connection of the passage is this judgment coming, and actually, the pending doom of it, and that was Habakkuk's first bit that we looked at yesterday. Today we're looking at his second kind of complaint, which I think concerns the judgment that's coming. It seems unfair. How can you just drop a net in the ocean and just catch anything? It doesn't seem to separate the righteous from the unrighteous. So what's the point? So you've got all of this argument coming, I think, very poetic form, very lamentful, and very well thought through and well crafted from Habakkuk. And that's what I see here. I don't know, there may be other things we see as well. Tandy?
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Yeah. I think certainly Habakkuk is really baffled by the way God responds. Certainly his ways are much higher than our own ways. And he's trying to understand. It's like when you look at God's own character, and you're thinking, God, you're all about holiness and all this. How can you go for something or for a group of people that actually seems worse? I think this really is still the baffling question, even in our times, but it only points us to that very statement I began with: God's ways are much higher than our own ways. And I also think it also just led me to this thing I always see also even in our times. How do we rank sin? He thinks this group is far worse, but these people are much more sinful. It's like you've gone for the worst person or group of people to actually deal with this that you could think of. And then you're wondering, how does God view us? How does God view sin? Is there anything that is better than the other? I think this is what it leads me to think. You could be thinking, I think, my sin is better. And I think also there's there's another thing in terms of how we expect things to be solved is we can put a shape and a cut and a size and a formula, and yet God blows our minds. God uses the foolish things of this world to confound the wise. And we see this constantly in scripture. Does it look like a certain cut and shape? Does it look like a certain title? Does it look like a certain gender? Does it look like a certain... There's always this battle going on in this world that even when a solution arrives, or that which is God's answer, it arrives in a way that we never ever fathom. It doesn't look like what we have as a picture. It simply tells me God does not have a formula. He doesn't do formula. We as individuals, as human beings, are the ones that think, I'll rate that based on this and based on that and based on that. But God always blows our minds. It just took me back to a time, because this is the thing about the prophet, when at the start of COVID, and people are like, okay, so where are the prophets who normally speak into these things? Can they say something? What on earth is going on here? And it looked as if God was just silent. The mouthpieces of God were just silent. And then that's when we see that God is just God, all by himself. And he does things in his ways that only he understands. So I think this is what really Habakkuk is battling with, as probably we do battle with these things in our time. A lot of things may not make sense to us. How does this work? But I think it just opens us up to say, I think the more flexible and open to the Spirit of God to actually show us, and we're not rigid and closed, and because this is what the world does to us. And yet I think the principle I learned there from Habakkuk is, if you open up to my ways, just watch me. Even for the things that trouble us, because sometimes we can be so troubled about things that have a very simple, straightforward answer. And instead of resting and relaxing in that. So it'll be very interesting to see how he moves on from this point, because it is a very baffling answer that he's got there for his question or for his complaint.
Yeah, thanks, Tandy. I think, and that kind of watch and see is where Habakkuk ends up, isn't it? With I'll be a watchman, and let's see what God says. and I think, and I think there's a lot going on here, and I think the overarching thing of God. We live out our day to day here, but there's sometimes huge schemes, it's huge strategy, massive things happening that are outside of our understanding. I think that's well put. Thank you, Tandy. Mandy, and then Steve.
I'm a bit fascinated by the references to fishing in here. And I was just looking at the notes in my Bible at the bottom, where it talks about the fish net. The net represents military strength, which was provided by Marduk, the god of Babylon. Babylonians offering animal sacrifices. And it also says that his dragnet, hook net, and dragnet represents the various military strategies employed by the Babylonians. And it just made me think, well, what were we fishing for, really? Because if we jump forward a few hundred years, and Jesus said to his disciple, I want you to be fishers of men, it then puts a little bit of a different slant on that, because it's a military strategy that's being put in place. I think because it in the New Testament, it's all coupled with grace. It kind of looks a little bit different, but actually, if you look at it in terms of that whatever you fish is in your net, and whatever you open at the end of your fishing trip is your fruit, isn't it, of your labour? And I thought it made me think as well of Jonah, in a sense, because obviously Jonah going overboard, and God literally fished him out with a fish. And it's what is God fishing for God is fishing for individuals, whereas you look at the Babylonian Empire, they're fishing for power. And yeah, you could go on and on. It just, the fishing analogy just really sort of caught my eye there. And it kind of opened a little bit of how does God think type scenario in his strategies going forward, because like we said yesterday, he Habakkuk was saying, well, look, it's the law that's being prevented here. And if you look at the fishing from the point of view of the disciples, that was the pushing forward of the gospel, not the holding back of the gospel. There's lots of things you can start to look at fishing. I'm not going to go any more into it because it probably opens a whole wide, massive area. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight that and how it struck me, really.
Yeah, thanks, Mandy. And I think the fishing net, so if you think in oral cultures and so on, you needed a narrative to explain something. I remember back to my history in Zimbabwe, learning about the Zulu method, and they had like the horns of a buffalo, right? So you had like the head and the horns that went round, and it was a battle strategy that was used. So you had when you're attacking a settlement, what you do is you send the horns around the settlement, so there's no escape, and then you'd use the battering ram of the head to come right through and destroy. And that was a battle strategy that was explained using a bull's head and the horns. And so I think there may have been something similar for the Babylonians here with the fish net. They may have thought, right, we need to surround this and come in and catch it all like a net. There may have been something like that in their battle strategies in the military. I don't know enough about the Babylonians. I need another visit to the British Museum or something to look at some of those. But I think you're right. There is a strategy here, but it's also part of their worship. So they worship this net as a strategy. They worship their strategy as well. And he's bringing that up, and it's all linked to false gods. You're absolutely right. It's all tied in with those things. And so I'll just throw the other counter side to that. Habakkuk's idea is, if he does well, God will bless him. And actually, his purpose, sometimes if we're not careful, and I'm not saying this is Habakkuk's purpose, but I'm saying it's just there. Sometimes people are following God for it to go well for them, rather than following God out of love for God. And actually then when a massive judgment comes on your nation, you're left going, what's going on here, God? why is this happening? I'm more righteous than the people doing the judgment. I'm more, and so why do we do stuff for God is part of the question that's raised as well. And so I think there's a lot going on here. Is your hand still up, Mandy? I'm just checking.
No, I should put it down.
Okay, that's fine. Right, Steve. You're muted, Steve, but we won't sing at you. We need Leslie back for singing.
Well, right. Yes. Yeah, I think the ESV is a very good Bible. There's lots of other good Bibles too. I like the headings that they put, and I would have, and I think the clue was there, which I brought up, what was spoken about blessings and actually curses. I would see this more. So, Deuteronomy 28 is a long chapter with blessings from verses 1 to 14 and curses from 15 all the way to 68. And then another one, Leviticus 26. The ESV calls it blessings for obedience. The same title as the other chapter. Blessings from verse 1 to 13, and then punishment for disobedience, which you can call judgment, goes on from 14 to 46. And we've got this in the New Testament as well. You know, there are those people that seem to be blessed beyond belief. You know, in Revelation, you've got a church, and they think they're blessed beyond belief, and Jesus judges them, pronounces their judgment, which is, you're wretched and poor, naked. They got plenty of money, plenty of food, plenty of, you know, good friends, blah blah blah. So yeah, maybe this is part of you know, and it's reaping and sowing. That's how, you know, if you follow the Lord, you're sowing well and you'll reap blessings. If you're disobeying the Lord, you're sowing badly. You're sowing weeds, and you will reap those, and that's curses. Yeah, I think that sums it up really. So it's to do with judgment, and I understand that comment in some sense, but I like what the ESV, and it calls it blessings for obedience, because God does put off His judgment in some sense till the final judgment. Sure, it's good, John. How does God give? You know, it may be part of this, the way it just works spiritually. God says, "Well, okay, is that what you want? You know, disobedience, you're going to reap. I'm sorry, but you know, it's not even judgment." So I don't know. Anyway, that's enough of my two cents.
Yeah. And I think these wrestles, I'm enjoying what you're bringing, Steve, and wrestling with, and I think that's exactly the wrestle that's in the passage. I think one of the things about Deuteronomy and some of these passages, if my people who are called by my name, you know, if my people, the people of Israel is a whole nation of people. And within that nation, you've got people living right and you've got people living wrong, and you've got systems and you've got things working. And I'm going to come to you in a moment, Jenny, so you can relax. I'll come to you next, because I saw your hand earlier, I thought, but it went back down. So, but okay, yeah. So I think looking at this, I've found something in the commentary I've got alongside here, which says Christians may find that an examination of their allegiances creates internal conflict when they're part of an affluent society. Habakkuk reveals the deeper causes of violence when he points to the worship of the net and calls for a rigorous evaluation of any devotion to prosperity in the light of our ultimate devotion to God. He shows us the problem from the side of a small country dominated by a great economic and military power. His exposure to the worship of the source of prosperity is echoed by Isaiah's ridicule of the deluded man who worships what he himself makes, which is idolatry. And so there's some deep things going on in Habakkuk's words. It's not a light surface level thing. It's very, very deep. And it challenges us now, just as it challenged then. And I think that's really important. So over to you, Jenny, and then we'll come to Mandy.
Trying to think how I was going to say now. I just think, you know, God is the God of mercy, but He expects us to follow Him. And I think, you know, these were God's chosen people that were supposed to be under the law, and they obviously He kept warning them. God kept warning them, but they just didn't do what He wanted, and they went away from Him. So God has to punish disobedience really in them. But the actual I've forgotten the other people now. What the name of them?
The Chaldeans.
The Babylonians.
Yeah.
They're not under the law. They didn't know right from wrong, whereas the Jewish people did know right from wrong. They knew what was right, and God kept warning them, so he had to punish them to bring them back. But the thing is, I think he just, not more than punish, he's actually withdraws his protection from them, really. I think, he draws his protection from you sometimes when you go astray, so that you'll learn. Because the thing is, with a child, you punish a child, it's not because you don't love them, it's because you love them that you punish them. And he always finds a way back, doesn't he? God does. He's if you turn to me, I will relent. But the thing is, I think God, he's got these. God's character is that he hates sin, doesn't he? He can't. It says in here that you can't tolerate sin. So, but the thing was, I think he's more lenient with the Babylonians, so he allows them to do what they want because they haven't been given the law. That's what I see it as. I don't know if
Okay,
that's right.
that's a point I hadn't seen there, but I think in some ways the Babylonians themselves, if you look at other prophetic literature, the Babylonians themselves were going to be punished later for so there's this kind of thing of judgment and all of this that is quite difficult to work out, and I don't think it's a simple thing trying to work out how God arrives at what he does. And I think this is part of Habakkuk, is trying to tease that out a bit. And I think this is a wrestle. And I think what you're saying, that they didn't know the law, but they kind of prospered to a level where they could be military takeovers of countries, and Habakkuk sees that very clearly. But thanks, Jenny. Mandy.
I think sometimes as well, we just looking at it from a slightly different perspective. Sometimes what we want is not what's good for us, is it? And Habakkuk doesn't want all this violence and stuff. But I often think you look at governments and public services, they only really people at top only ever really stay in power for about 5 years. So they have their 5-year plans, and everybody else suffers as a result of them only looking as far ahead as 5 years. And I think as human beings, we're on this earth for somewhere between 70 and 100 years if we live a full life. And God goes on from everlasting to everlasting. So our little 100 years is like the 5-year plan, and God has got a plan here that is bigger than the 5-year plan. He's got a plan that's a everlasting plan, and we all know what follows and stuff, but eventually Israel does turn back to God. They do get their land back, and this is just kind of like the start of God pulling his people back, because we've got the benefit of hindsight. So there's a plan being put in place here, and Habakkuk doesn't get it because it's a plan that's being put in place over several generations, and Habakkuk will never see the fulfillment of the plan. He's right there at the start, so it feels like doom and gloom. And I think sometimes when we look at stuff spiritually, because it's hard for us to see the end and might never see the end in our lifetime, it's almost like God's abandoned us, but actually God hasn't. It's Jesus going for the one lost sheep. And you see, if Jesus leaves the safe sheep behind, he leaves them behind to go and get the one. Those left behind haven't been abandoned. He's left them in safety. He's left them with the Holy Spirit, not abandoned. But you could feel like that if you wanted to. And I think with Habakkuk, there's that big plan going on, and Habakkuk can't get his head around it because he's not going to be on the planet for long enough.
Thanks, Mandy. Well put. And I think the kind of overarching long range of God means our following of God, we need to trust his long-term strategy. I think in terms of, we need to be careful not to worship the net. We need to be careful not to be so tied into the systems around us that we worship those systems and we view those as part of our Christianity. God is with us through thick and thin. He's with us through high times in a nation and low times in a nation. And actually that connection with him is not formulaic, as Tandy was saying. It's personal, it's real. But there are overarching things. There are highs and lows in nations. There are times of destruction in nations. And if we're worshipping the net, when the net begins to crumble, when things begin to change, we're in devastation alongside everyone else. We don't have a clear picture. And I think there's some things in this that are important for us, that we need to make sure that our Christianity isn't a worship of systems that are nets. And we need to make sure that the idolatry that is around is not in us and our relationship with God. And I think, that kind of thing I posted in the beginning of this, where it was sort of saying, why does evil seem to go unpunished? Those things. The righteous need to live by faith regardless. There is something of that. It's not just for, if I do this, God will bless me. If I do this, God will bless me. If you're doing that, you're doing it for the stuff, not for him. And this is what I think is part of the wrestle in this. There's so many layers to it. There's lots of things in this, as you're bringing up lots of different areas. But I think there's some of that we need to look at as well. I think, yeah. Steve, go for it.
I'm glad I'm not muted. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm just following. I didn't think I'd follow on from. Yeah, that's quite right. But there's spiritual law, and if you're obedient to God, He blesses you. Mm-hmm. So you shouldn't do it for the wrong motives. But it's yeah. Sometimes it's deferred. Also, the blessing. I think, you'd be like Job. You say, "Where's the blessing?" The blessing comes at the end, and He's blessed doubly in all respects. So we'll discuss that when we get to Job one day. But yeah, I was. This is also on within this. It's on topic within this discussion of. See. I mean, I thought about it before, but I asked the question, posed the question. God is love, and sure, there's sin will be cut off from His nation, but some people take that, we'll be cut off from God's blessings. Those people in the second death, in hell, But yeah, that's true. But also, there's more verses that says God is there. Of course He's there. He's omnipresent. How can He not be in hell? I'll just let them get on with their party. What are we going to start there, drinking and whatever the heathen people say happens in hell? No. So God is there, and God is love. And I had this discussion with a person that sort of was in what I would call is the wrong, the wrong type of church, and said no, hell doesn't exist. And I said, okay, so you believe heaven exists, but hell is not real. Okay. Anyway, and he said, well, yes, because God is love, but you can't do that. That's not love. And you've only got to read, love, an intense feeling of deep affection, a great interest and pleasure in doing something. So what are we saying? God is having great interest in punishing people in hell for eternity, in eternal torment. Now, see that maybe there is a pleasure in true justice. These are difficult things you've got to wrestle with. Mm-hmm. and anybody's got the answer, really. Well, the question is, it says clearly, my spirit is. Where can you descend? The psalmist says to the pit of hell. No, I can't escape your spirit. Spirit's everywhere. It's omnipresent. It says in Revelation, and Jesus, they will be tormented day and night in His presence. In Jesus is there. So if anybody has got strong feelings, how does God stand it? I don't mean to get. See, I cannot judge God. His judgment is true and righteous, and it's holy. So I can't. God's wrong doing, judging that way. No, I can't stand to hear that. But I want to know what is the answer to the conundrum. God is in the eternal torment, and is it love? See, there is an argument that says it's love.
Yeah.
See, it's love not to punish the unrighteous.
Yeah.
To the detriment of the righteous.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't want to get too off topic, but it is within this.
It's judgment is within this, and what I would say is the difference between this in Habakkuk, but there's inferences for later, is this is a judgment on the people of Israel that takes them into exile, right? It is a restorative process, but in Israel it's not really too restorative. In Judah it is more. But the 10 tribes of Israel are lost, basically, through this process. And actually that is horrifying. And to be a prophet seeing that coming is tough. And to be arguing against God, not against Him, but questioning this, is something He can do. And that's kind of what you're doing as well, Steve, but you've moved it to the end of the world scenario, which is slightly different and has a few different edges in this. And so I don't want to go into all of that. We'll do that further when we get to Revelation, and we'll do a bit more on that. But I think on this, I'm not just trying to run away from the question, but I think in this there's some difficulties in this that will not be part of the judgment you're referring to in the same way. So if the Chaldeans are a judgment on the people of Israel for generational upon generational sin, right, that they haven't turned from. There are living in Israel people like Habakkuk praying, prophetic people praying to God. You have alongside your wheeler dealers, you've got all that kind of thing in society, you've got all the different things going on in different places, you've got this whole nation full of good and bad and indifferent, you've got people controlling, you've got all these different elements going on, you've got areas of idolatry, you've got areas of this, you've got areas of true worship, you've got areas of this. It's like a whole variety of fish in the sea. For the military might of the Chaldeans with their net military strategy or whatever it is, coming as a whoomp into the sea, grabbing whatever it does and pulling it out, seems amazingly indiscriminate. And in our individualistic Western societies, where we view everything as, oh, well, me, I did this, so then God does this, and I do this, and God does this, and yes, there is a relationship with God. Yes, we live in that. Yes, we work that out. But there is also what Tandy brought in before she had to disappear to work. What Tandy brought in is there are these overarching kind of strategies of God that are doing whole nations. And what Habakkuk's on, part of his argument here is, what about the good fish in the net? There's going to be good fish caught up in this net. It's an indiscriminate net. Whereas with the final judgment, as I understand it, there's a separating of the sheep from the goats. There's a separation that takes place. Whereas in this, it is a different reason for judgment, but it is fairly indiscriminate and this is what I feel part of of Habakkuk's question is, this is an indiscriminate judgment of God using a blunt implement. I'm not saying they weren't clever, but it's a rather blunt implement. A nation's just going to run across your nation and take it out like a net. Good and bad are going to be caught up in it. Actually, the whole thing's going to be messy. Now that is quite something to wrestle with, especially when we are so empowered as individuals and see our own individual worth as opposed to a group of people. That there's a lot going on here that's challenged. So I don't know if I've got that fully right, but I just want to throw that thought in there about how indiscriminate this seems, and the difference between the judgments I think needs to be brought in there as well. So is your hand still up from before, Steve? And we'll go to Mandy. Is it?
It went up because
okay.
I'm happy to wait if Andy's bursting.
Let's go for it, Mandy.
No, I was just listening to you there, Nigel, talking about how Habakkuk's challenging. Well, there's some good fish in this net, and I think that's something that comes up time and time again, doesn't it? You've got Abraham pleading for Sodom and Gomorrah. Starts there really, and time and time again. But then again, if you look at the Babylonian exile, how many people shone brighter because they were in exile than they would have shone otherwise, and they are now in the Bible, and some of them have their own books in the Bible because of that, and how much they learn. And there's always going to be that remnant. I mean, you see that all the way through, don't you, the remnant, and then you see Pentecost at the end of that. And I think, again, that's another one of those strategies that God puts in place. Like, well, when Moses felt alone up that mountain and they were building that calf at the bottom, he could have said, God, I'm the only one. I really am the only one. But then when you get all the way to Pentecost, that being the only one up the mountain was worth it. And it's again seeing that big picture and not being able to see that big picture.
Yeah. Thanks, Mandy. And I think, how we live our lives is important, whether it's in captivity or whether it's in prosperity. And I think this is very well put, Mandy. And I think that kind of how we live things out, and actually in the midst of despair, is sometimes the opportunity for people to shine. Sort of when you've got an economic downturn in nations, some people do really well out of it. There's something that just takes off. There's businesses launched. There's things that start sometimes in those times that become the next big thing in the next season, and part of and so in some of these things, the highs and the lows, it's how we live out our lives for God despite highs or lows. The Apostle Paul, as we were looking at him earlier, when we were finishing off Acts, it was very much, in one of his letters he says, I've learned how to live in prosperity, in want, in need, hungry, full. I've learned how to serve God in all circumstances. And I think that's a remarkable thing, but that is the challenge to us, is how do we live in all circumstances, in all situations, and not have our worship of God due to the stuff we get. And actually that's part of the wrestle. It's worshipping him, for who he is, and he will bless us as well. I mean, I'm not against blessing, but that is part of the fruit of our relationship with him. It is not a every season thing. necessarily. There's highs and lows and things, but our worship for God continues. And I think there's some lessons from Paul to learn there as well in this. I think it's a really challenging. I mean, I think this kind of shakes stuff to the core. This kind of passage, how we live out our lives for God is very important and vital. But it's not just for the stuff, and I think that's important. Steve?
Yeah, I was just thinking about, see, all our modern Bibles normally put, they'll group it, which is useful to us. Oh, Habakkuk's complaint, the Lord's answer, Habakkuk's second. But actually, if it didn't have didn't have that, I would have just read on naturally wouldn't put the line there. Because you see, you're quite right in one sense. What you said, oh Lord, of course, because it's there in 12. Sometimes you just got to shut up and read the text. Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, you have ordained them as judgment. O Rock, have established them for reproof. So, whether it's talking about the end judgment, he's prophesying about the final judgment, or he's maybe saying that things that are, the answer in 5 to 11 was actually a judgment before the final judgment. Anyway, and it's all you can have a bit of wordplay. I was doing a bit then myself, maybe from these headings. Well, it's not judgment. It's don't be silly. I'm talking to myself. Obedience goes through judgment and leads to life. Disobedience goes through judgment and leads to death. Even before the final judgment. All these things that I spoke of in Deuteronomy, Leviticus 20, what was it, 26, two whole chapters. It's there from cover to cover. God ordains blessings, and then judgment came. Sorry, you didn't pay attention. They said, don't eat from that fruit. Death's here. And all these other things, there's this judgment along the way going up to a judgment you don't want to get caught in. I love this because it's so deep. It's like, it's not just here. Give me any scripture from the Bible. But I just want to talk 1 second about 17. Is he then to keep on emptying his net and mercilessly killing nations forever? Well, there is a time, Jesus tells us, it's like the net that will be emptied, and he'll keep the good fish, and those fish, See, this is, we talked about separation. Yeah, the biblical term is cut off. He will cut off sin. Yeah, he'll cut off the sinner that's not redeemed. And unfortunately, the second death, he will see. He not only judges people, he will find the sheep and the goat nations. He will judge against the goat nations mercilessly, killing those nations as in eternal destruction forever. As much as we don't like the sound of that, anybody here to call escape? He has life for you, not death.
I think I see 17 slightly almost like him saying to the Babylonians about the Babylonians. He's saying, actually, is this great nation just going to go on and on and up? Or are you going to judge them because we're more righteous than them? And I see that kind of argument back and forth. He's almost like questioning God. Well, how can you do that? Surely you've got to have something else. He's calling. So what I think is, in a way, he's arguing in the prophetic about what is to happen. In the same way that Abraham was saying, don't destroy Sodom if you find 30 good people in it, maybe 15, maybe 5, maybe, that argument is where he's standing and wrestling. And if we look at the last verse, and we're sort of getting up to time here, but that last verse of 2:1, okay, and in defense of the ESV and other Bibles putting titles in this of who's speaking, actually, if you follow the context of the thing, you will find a break, not in the way it's laid out, but in who's speaking. If you ask yourself who's speaking in each bit, you find that it's fairly well fits. There is a system to it. But if you look at chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower. I will look out and see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaint." Right? And you've got this idea that the prophet Habakkuk has asked God, what are you doing? How is this going to work? And how is this fair? And he's then said, I'm going to sit and watch, Lord. I'm watching. Come on, speak to me. I'm watching. I'm watching for your answer. I'm watching. I'm going to be a watchman and watch for your answer, so I know what your answer is and I can say your answer. I want your answer on this, Lord. And so what he's done is something we should do. And I think this is where the prophetic edge to things in the church often can be. If God told you what was about to happen in your nation, and you go, well, Lord, this isn't fair, this isn't fair, this is, I don't like that, I don't like this. And to stand there and go, Lord, this doesn't seem right, and wrestling it through with God. Very often when we wrestle with something in prayer, or we wrestle with something prophetically, we learn so much. Jacob, when he wrestled with God, he had his hip jerked. He walked with a limp for the rest of his life, probably. But actually, with that, his whole identity came about. He was renamed from being the deceiver Jacob to being the Israel, right? He who wrestles with God. So that shift took place. In the wrestling, in the prophetic wranglings, Lord, I don't understand this, I don't get it, and wrestling with him on it, show me, Lord, I need to see this. I'm a watchman on the tower, I'm going to stand there and wrestle with you over these things for my nation, for the people around me, for my understanding, for the whole thing. There's something of this, Lord, there's something here in this mix I can't quite separate out. I need to see some of that. I'm going to wrestle for that, Lord. I'm going to work it through. Come and show me. Come and teach me. And that's almost where we finished today. And it's what we've been doing the whole way through this. And I think that kind of waiting for God, that seeking him and needing answers, that's a interesting place to be. But all that Habakkuk has said, I get, in a way. I mean, there might be depths of it I still have to understand. There might be more to understand. But I think, how can such things happen? How can things seem indiscriminate at times? What is my righteousness about? How should I live my life? And what do I need to focus on as I live my life? And how do I do that? And all of those things are all tied to the answers of this. And I think it should spur us prophetically. So that we move from the prophetic just being a nice word for someone to the level of the prophetic where we're wrestling over nations, we're wrestling over some of those things with God, saying, come and show me. And in Peter it says that actually these prophets wrestled for things about the life of Jesus, that they were wondering and pondering through these things. And God sometimes uses mystery to teach us a lot. We like it straightforward. We like it just dump, ba-dump, ba-dump, ba-dump. And that's all I want. But sometimes God gives us a conundrum and a mystery and a riddle and something to work through. And this is, for me, that draws me in. and for others it does as well. There's something of this. We need to know who we are. We need to know our relationship with God. Our relationship with God needs to be one of love, not just ticking the boxes of something. Our relationship with God needs to be solid. And there, yeah, I know you love me, Lord. I know you have good things for me. I know you bless me. I know you're with me, right? But at the same time, I don't understand this, Lord. And that dialogue, that talking, that wrestling actually begins to build something in us. I don't think Habakkuk came out the same way he came into this whole conversation. And I think that's why we've got the book of Habakkuk. But anyway, any further thoughts? Anyone want to chip in? Right, we'll leave it there. But thank you all, and we will continue Habakkuk 2 tomorrow. The next exciting installment, which is God's answer. And this is going to be interesting because the question sounded simple at the beginning, and then the answer was quite complex. And then the next question's been quite complex, and now the answer's coming from God. I'm looking forward to the answer. And you think there's something of Moses and his humility. God said he spoke to him face to face like you speak to any man. But to most of the people, God speaks in riddles. He speaks in dreams. He speaks in pictures. He speaks in ways that take some working out. It's a bit like parables. Parables make us think. And we try and understand what the parable means. And in the same way, that's one of the most powerful ways God speaks to us, because it does something to us. It engages us, and I find this very engaging. Anyway, God bless you all, and I will move us offline here. And Mike Rock, I agree with you. Amen. No fake idols. Agreed. Thank you. Okay, God bless.